On the 4th of October 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first artificial satellite. It was approximately the size of a beach ball. It transmitted a steady beep for 21 days, then went silent. In the 68 years since, humans have placed over 11,000 objects into orbit. Of those, roughly half are still up there. Of the rest, some came back as planned. Some did not. Space exploration is, by its public record, a story of achievement. By its complete record, it is also a story of catastrophe, classification, and ambition that has exceeded its calculations. What follows is a guided descent through the layers of human activity above the atmosphere. Tier 1, the public record. The space exploration story that every textbook tells. Sputnik launched in October 1957. Yuri Gagarin reached orbit in April 1961. Alan Shepard followed 2 weeks later. Neil Armstrong walked on the moon in July 1969. The Space Shuttle flew its first mission in April 1981. Hubble launched in April 1990. The International Space Station began assembly in 1998. Curiosity landed on Mars in 2012. James Webb began returning images in 2022. These are the milestones that appear in classroom timelines. They are accurate. They are also incomplete. The Apollo program. 12 American astronauts walked on the moon between July 1969 and December 1972. 24 total astronauts traveled to lunar orbit or beyond. The Apollo program cost approximately $25 billion in then-year dollars, approximately $150 billion in current value. At its peak, the program employed over 400,000 people. The program's official mission was scientific. Its actual driver was the political and military rivalry with the Soviet Union. The decision to send humans to the moon was made by President Kennedy in May 1961, 6 weeks after Gagarin's flight. The decision was a public relations response to a Soviet achievement. The science followed. The space race. Between 1957 and 1969, the United States and the Soviet Union competed for primacy in space access through what was called the space race. The two nations achieved many firsts within months of each other. First satellite, Soviet first man in space, Soviet first spacewalk, Soviet first woman in space, Soviet first woman in space, Soviet first lunar flyby, Soviet first soft landing on the moon, Soviet first humans on the moon, American. After the American lunar landing, the Soviet program effectively withdrew from the human lunar competition and refocused on space stations and unmanned exploration. The race, in its original form, ended in 1972. Subsequent space activity was, with some exceptions, collaborative rather than competitive. The major modern milestones. The Hubble Space Telescope, launched in 1990, has produced over 1 million scientific observations. The International Space Station, continuously occupied since November 2000, is the longest occupied human habitation in space. The Mars rovers, beginning with Sojourner in 1997 and continuing through Perseverance in 2021, have produced the most detailed surface examination of another planet in human history. These are the success stories. They are real. They are taught in schools. At Tier 1, the public record is the story of human progress beyond the atmosphere. Below this tier, the story acquires additional dimensions. Tier 2, the acknowledged disasters. Catastrophes that are publicly known but rarely covered in detail. Apollo 1. On the 27th of January 1967, astronauts Gus Grissom, Edward White, and Roger Chaffee were conducting a routine ground test of the Apollo command module on the launch pad at Cape Kennedy. The cabin atmosphere was pure oxygen at 16.7 pounds per second square inch. A spark, likely from faulty wiring beneath Grissom's seat, ignited the atmosphere. The 3 astronauts died within seconds. The cabin temperature exceeded 1,000 degrees within moments. The investigation that followed produced changes that the program had previously resisted. The cabin atmosphere was changed. The hatch design was redesigned to permit emergency opening. The wiring was substantially overhauled. NASA delayed the next Apollo manned mission for 18 months. The fire was, in some respects, what allowed the lunar landing to occur. Soyuz 1. On the 24th of April 1967, 3 months after the Apollo 1 fire, cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov launched aboard a Soyuz spacecraft. The mission was the first crewed flight of a new spacecraft design. Multiple systems failed during the flight. The parachute did not deploy correctly on re-entry. The capsule struck the ground at approximately 140 kilometers per hour. Komarov was killed. Komarov knew before launch that the spacecraft was not ready. He launched anyway. The backup pilot, Yuri Gagarin, would have been launched in Komarov's place had Komarov refused. Komarov did not want Gagarin to die. The detailed account of Komarov's pre-launch knowledge has been documented through declassified Soviet records and witness interviews. The recordings of his final communications were partially preserved. They have not been released in full. Soyuz 11. On the 30th of June 1971, after a successful mission to the Salyut-1 space station, cosmonauts Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev began their return to Earth during the separation of the orbital module from the descent module. A pressure equalization valve opened prematurely at an altitude where atmospheric pressure was effectively zero. The cabin depressurized in seconds. The three cosmonauts who were not wearing pressure suits at the time, standard Soviet procedure for descent at that time, died of asphyxiation. When recovery crews opened the capsule on the steppe of Kazakhstan, all three men were still in their seats. They were the first humans to die in space. They remain the only humans to have died above the Kármán line. After Soyuz 11, Soviet and later Russian descent procedures required pressure suits throughout re-entry. The practice was adopted by NASA as well. The lessons cost 3 lives. Challenger. On the 28th of January 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart 73 seconds after launch. 7 astronauts were killed. The cause was the failure of an O-ring seal in the right solid rocket booster, exacerbated by unusually cold weather on the launch morning engineers, at the contractor. Morton Thiokol had warned against launching at low temperatures. NASA management overruled the engineering recommendation. The disaster was broadcast live. The mission included Krista McAuliffe, a New Hampshire schoolteacher, participating in the Teacher in Space project. Schools across the United States were watching the launch in classrooms. Millions of American children witnessed the disaster in real time. The cultural impact was substantial. The Rogers Commission, which investigated the disaster, concluded that the decision-making process at NASA had been institutionally compromised. Physicist Richard Feynman, a member of the commission, demonstrated the O-ring failure in a glass of ice water during a televised hearing. The simplicity of the demonstration became iconic. Columbia. On the 1st of February 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia broke apart during re-entry over Texas and Louisiana. 7 astronauts were killed. The cause was damage to the leading edge of the left wing, caused by a piece of foam insulation that had separated from the external fuel tank during launch and struck the wing. The damage was visible on launch day footage. NASA engineering teams had assessed the strike. They concluded it was not a flight safety issue. They were wrong. The disaster, like Challenger, produced a formal investigation that concluded NASA's safety culture had degraded. The shuttle program was effectively terminated. The final mission, STS-135, launched in July 2011. The program had operated for 30 years. It had killed 14 astronauts in 2 accidents. At Tier 2, the major catastrophes of human spaceflight are documented and discussed. Below this tier, the catastrophes become less publicly remembered. Tier 3, the forgotten losses. Spaceflight catastrophes and incidents that are documented but rarely discussed. Nedelin disaster. On the 24th of October 1960, during preparations for a test launch of an R-16 intercontinental ballistic missile at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, a second stage engine ignited prematurely while the missile was still on the launch pad. The resulting fireball killed an estimated 8 to 126 people on the pad, including Marshal Mitrofan Nedelin, the head of the Soviet missile forces. The disaster was kept secret from the Soviet public and from the West for decades. The Cosmodrome continued operating, replacement personnel were brought in. The R-16 program continued. The official Soviet position until the 1989 reforms under Gorbachev was that Nedelin had died in a plane crash. The actual sequence of events was reconstructed by Western intelligence within weeks. It was not publicly acknowledged for nearly 30 years. The Soyuz 18A abort. On the 5th of April 1975, cosmonauts Vasily Lazarev and Oleg Makarov launched aboard Soyuz 18A. The third stage of the rocket failed to separate properly. The crew aborted at high altitude. The descent module re-entered the atmosphere on a steep ballistic trajectory, subjecting the cosmonauts to over 20 Gs of deceleration. The capsule landed in deep mountains in the Altai region. The cosmonauts survived. Lazarev never flew in space again. The Soviet program treated the incident as a minor anomaly. Western analysts only learned of the incident decades later through declassified records. The cosmonauts' detailed accounts of the violent re-entry were not made public for many years. The unaccounted for cosmonauts. During the 1,960 seconds, multiple amateur radio enthusiasts, particularly Achille and Giovanni Battista Giudica, Cordiglia in Italy, reported intercepting transmissions from what they claimed were Soviet space missions that ended in disaster. The transmissions included a woman's voice apparently dying of oxygen deprivation, a man's heart monitor ceasing, a series of distress calls in Russian. The Giudica-Cordiglia brothers' recordings have been examined by multiple researchers. The recordings exist, the interpretation is contested. The Soviet Union maintained, throughout the Cold War, that no manned space missions had ended in announced loss of life. Western researchers, Examining declassified records after the Soviet Union dissolved have found no documented evidence supporting the existence of unannounced cosmonaut deaths in orbit. The Judica Cordiglia recordings may be authentic intercepts of training simulations of test flights with mannequins or of unrelated radio traffic. They may be hoaxes, they have not been definitively explained. The cosmonauts in the recordings, if they were real, have not been identified. The Plesetsk disaster. On the 18th of March 1980, a Vostok 2M rocket exploded on the launch pad at the Plesetsk Cosmodrome in northern Russia, killing 48 people. The cause was traced to a propellant leak that had been ignored during the launch preparation. The disaster was not acknowledged by the Soviet Union for 10 years. The launch was a classified military reconnaissance mission. The personnel were members of the Soviet Strategic Rocket Forces. The families were told that their relatives had died in a training accident. When the disaster was finally acknowledged in 1990, the Russian government provided no compensation. The deaths had occurred at a time and on a system that did not officially exist in the public record. The re-entry survivors. On the 25th of July, 1969, 3 NASA astronauts returning from the first lunar landing were locked in a quarantine trailer immediately after recovery. The quarantine was a precaution against potential lunar pathogens. The astronauts Armstrong, Aldrin Collins spent 21 days inside the mobile quarantine facility, then the lunar receiving laboratory before being released. The quarantine procedure was repeated for Apollo 12 and Apollo 14. The procedure was discontinued for Apollo 15 onward, on the determination that the moon did not host pathogens that could threaten Earth life. The original quarantine, in hindsight, was inadequate. The astronauts walked from the recovery ship to the trailer through open air. Lunar dust was on their suits. The official containment was a public relations exercise as much as a scientific safeguard. If the moon had hosted a pathogen, the containment would not have prevented its spread. The lost cosmonauts question. Several Western researchers have, over the decades, alleged that the Soviet space program lost cosmonauts in unannounced missions during the late 1950 seconds and early 1960 seconds. The most famous allegation is that of Ivan Istoknikov, a cosmonaut who reportedly died on a Soyuz 2 mission that does not appear in Soviet records. The Ivan Istotnikov case is, by extensive subsequent research, a hoax. The story was created by Spanish artist Joan Fontcuberta as a deliberate art project. The story spread as if true. It is now repeatedly cited in unreliable space history publications. The deeper question, whether the Soviet Union lost cosmonauts before Gagarin, has been examined by Western historians using declassified records and biographical research. The conclusion is that no firm evidence of pre-Gagarin manned space fatalities has been produced. The absence of evidence is not proof of absence. It is the current state of the public record. At Tier 3, the catastrophes get smaller in public memory and larger in private record. At Tier 4, the catastrophes intersect with classification. Tier 4, the classified. Programs and incidents in space that operate or operated behind security classifications. The manned orbiting laboratory. In 1963, the United States Air Force announced the Manned Orbiting Laboratory Program, a space station that would serve as a manned reconnaissance platform. The official mission was research. The actual mission was photographic surveillance of Soviet military installations. The program was canceled in 1969 before its first manned flight, in part because unmanned reconnaissance satellites had become capable enough that human operators were no longer necessary. The Air Force Astronaut Corps trained for the program included individuals who would go on to civilian NASA careers. The MOL hardware and capabilities were transferred to other classified programs. The full set of MOL design documents was declassified in 2015, 50 years after the program began. The Soviet manned military space stations. Beginning in 1973, the Soviet Union launched a series of space stations under the cover designation Salyut. Several of these, Salyut 2, Salyut 3, Salyut 5, were not civilian science platforms, but military reconnaissance stations operated under the Almaz program. The Almaz stations were equipped with cameras, signal, intelligence equipment, and on Salyut 3, an anti-spacecraft cannon. The Almaz stations operated until 1978. They were the only manned military space stations in human history. The full operational records of the Almaz program have been partially declassified by Russia. Substantial portions remain classified. The Cosmos numbering system. The Soviet Union launched thousands of satellites under the cover designation Cosmos. The system was designed to obscure the actual purpose of each satellite. Cosmos 954, launched in 1977, was a radar reconnaissance satellite powered by a small nuclear reactor. The satellite suffered a propulsion failure and re-entered Earth's atmosphere over Canada in January 1978. The reactor and its radioactive fuel scattered across a wide swath of the Northwest Territories. The cleanup operation, called Operation Morning Light, ran for several months. Canadian and American military personnel recovered an estimated 0.1% of the original fuel. The remainder is believed to be still buried in the Canadian wilderness. The incident raised international attention to the use of nuclear power in spacecraft. The Soviet Union and the United States both reduced, though did not eliminate, their use of nuclear reactors in orbit. The Discoverer program. Beginning in 1959, the United States Central Intelligence Agency operated a secret reconnaissance satellite program under the cover designation Discoverer. The actual purpose of the program was photographic intelligence collection over the Soviet Union and other targets of interest. The first 13 Discoverer launches failed entirely. The 14th, launched in August 1960. Successfully returned a film canister to Earth via parachute recovery. The Discoverer program ran for 16 years under different cover names: KH-1, KH-2, KH-3, KH-4. It produced photographic intelligence of unprecedented detail. The full image archive of these programs was declassified in 1995, 3 decades after the original missions. The Manned Maneuvering Unit and the Lost Astronaut Question. In 1984, NASA astronauts Bruce McCandless and Robert Stewart conducted the first untethered spacewalks using the Manned Maneuvering Unit. The MMU allowed astronauts to fly hundreds of meters from the shuttle without any physical connection. If the MMU had failed, the astronauts would have continued drifting through space at orbital velocity. NASA's planned rescue procedure depended on the shuttle being able to maneuver to intercept the drifting astronaut. The procedure was not tested against a real failure. Had it failed, the astronaut would have died of asphyxiation in approximately 7 hours, alone in low Earth orbit. The body would have remained in orbit for months before eventually re-entering the atmosphere. The MMU was retired after the Challenger disaster. Subsequent EVAs have all used tethers. The untethered EVA, in retrospect, was a higher risk activity than the program publicly discussed. The X-37B. Since 2010, the United States Air Force has operated a small reusable spacecraft called the X-37B. The vehicle is unmanned, approximately 9 meters long, and resembles a miniature space shuttle. It has conducted multiple missions, each lasting between several months and over 2 years in orbit. The actual mission profile of the X-37B is classified. The Air Force has stated that the vehicle is used for technology demonstration and experiments. Open source observers have tracked the vehicle's orbital parameters and noted that its trajectories pass over regions of military interest. The full payload manifests of the X-37B missions have not been published. The vehicle is one of multiple active classified spaceflight programs operated by the United States. The full scope of classified space activity in any given year is partially deducible from publicly observable orbital traffic. It is not directly disclosed. At Tier 4, the publicly visible space program is one of 2 systems running in parallel. At Tier 5, the systems intersect with phenomena that have no easy explanation. Tier 5. The Unexplained. Observed phenomena in or beyond Earth orbit that current science cannot fully account for. The WOW signal. On the 15th of August 1977, Jerry Eman, a volunteer astronomer at Ohio State University's Big Ear Radio Telescope, was reviewing data from a previous night's observations. He saw a strong narrow band signal lasting 72 seconds at a frequency of 1420 MHz. The hydrogen line frequency that has long been suggested as a candidate band for extraterrestrial communication. Eamon circled the signal on the computer printout and wrote "wow" in the margin. The signal has never been detected again. Multiple searches at the same coordinates have produced no repetition. The signal does not match any known natural source. It does not match any known terrestrial source that could have been operating at that frequency and location. The WOW signal is, by available evidence, anomalous. It is not proof of an extraterrestrial intelligence. It is also not proof of anything else. It is a single 72-second event that has remained unexplained for over 40 years. The Tabby star. In 2015, citizen scientists working through the Planet Hunters program identified an unusual dimming pattern in the star Kick 8,462,852 in the constellation Cygnus. The star, nicknamed Tabby star after researcher Tabitha Voyagian, was observed dimming by amounts of up to 22% in irregular patterns. The pattern did not match any known type of stellar variability. Hypotheses included transiting comet swarms, internal stellar instability, and speculatively, a Dyson swarm constructed by an advanced civilization. Subsequent multi-wavelength observations have suggested that the dimming is most likely caused by uneven dust clouds in the star's vicinity. The Dyson swarm hypothesis is in current consensus, unlikely. The dimming pattern, however, is not fully explained by any current model. The star is the subject of continuing observation. It remains an unresolved astronomical anomaly. The Black Knight satellite. Internet folklore describes a mysterious object, the Black Knight satellite, allegedly orbiting Earth for 13,000 years and broadcasting signals. The story combines several distinct historical sources: a 1954 newspaper article about a possible natural moonlet, 1973 amateur radio claims about a delayed echo, and a 1998 photograph from Space Shuttle mission STS-88. The 1998 photograph shows a piece of insulating blanket that came loose during construction of the International Space Station. NASA has identified the object in the photograph. It is space debris from a known mission. The folkloric Black Knight combines these unrelated sources into a single narrative. No object matching the legendary Black Knight has been confirmed by orbital tracking. The internet folklore persists. The Apollo 17 video. During Apollo 17 in December 1972, astronauts Eugene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt conducted 3 lunar surface excursions. Some footage from those excursions, particularly from the rover-mounted camera, shows objects on the lunar surface that have, in subsequent decades, been pointed to by some viewers as evidence of artificial structures. The objects in the footage have been examined by multiple researchers. The consensus is that they are natural lunar geological features, crater rims, boulder shadows, regolith disturbances, viewed under unusual lighting conditions that produce apparent geometric regularity. Lunar imagery from later missions, including the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, has provided detailed coverage of the Apollo 17 landing site. No artificial structures are visible. The folkloric interpretation of the Apollo 17 footage persists despite the higher resolution coverage. The original mission's purpose was scientific. The mission record is well documented. The interpretive controversy is independent of the actual mission. The Pioneer anomaly. The Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 spacecraft, launched in 1972 and 1973 respectively, were the first probes to leave the inner solar system. As both spacecraft traveled outward, their trajectories deviated slightly from what theory predicted. Both spacecraft were experiencing a small unexplained acceleration toward the Sunday, on the order of 8 × 10 to the 10th meters per second econ squared. The Pioneer anomaly was identified in the 1,980 seconds. For 2 decades, it was one of the major unexplained phenomena in spacecraft tracking. Multiple hypotheses were proposed, including new physics. In 2012, a detailed thermal analysis of the spacecraft's radioisotope thermoelectric generators, conducted by Slava Churyshев and colleagues, identified the cause as anisotropic thermal radiation. The heat radiated from the spacecraft's RTGs was producing a small unbalanced thrust toward the Sunday. The Pioneer anomaly is now explained. The explanation was mundane. The phenomenon was real. The 2 decades of uncertainty produced significant theoretical work on the boundaries of general relativity. At Tier 5, the universe provides phenomena that are real and not fully explained. At Tier 6, the phenomena become harder to investigate. Tier 6, the astronomical mysteries. Phenomena observed at great distance that current physics models cannot satisfactorily account for. Dark matter. Galaxies rotate faster than the visible matter within them would gravitationally support. The discrepancy was first identified by Fritz Zwicky in 1933, and confirmed by Vera Rubin's observations of galactic rotation curves in the 1960 seconds and 1970 seconds. To account for the observed motion, modern cosmology requires the existence of dark matter, matter that does not interact with light that we can detect only through its gravitational effects. Dark matter constitutes approximately 85% of the matter in the universe. Despite half a century of dedicated experiments, no dark matter particle has ever been directly detected. The leading candidate, the WIMP, or weakly interacting massive particle, has been searched for with increasingly sensitive detectors. Each new detector has set tighter limits but has not detected the particle. Either dark matter exists in a form we have not yet identified, or our understanding of gravity at galactic scales is incomplete. Current cosmology cannot exclude either possibility. Dark energy. In 1998, 2 independent research teams, the High-Z Supernova Search and the Supernova Cosmology Project, found that the expansion of the universe is accelerating, not decelerating as previously expected. The acceleration requires a form of energy with negative pressure distributed uniformly throughout space. This is called dark energy. Dark energy constitutes approximately 68% of the energy content of the universe. Its physical nature is unknown. The most parsimonious explanation is Einstein's cosmological constant, a property of space itself. The cosmological constant, however, when calculated from quantum field theory, comes out to a value approximately 120 orders of magnitude larger than what is observed. The discrepancy between the calculated and observed value of the cosmological constant is the largest unresolved disagreement between theoretical and observed values in the history of physics. We do not know why the universe behaves the way it does at the largest scales. The Fermi paradox. In 1950, the physicist Enrico Fermi posed a question over lunch with colleagues at Los Alamos. Where is everybody? The question referred to the apparent absence of evidence for extraterrestrial intelligence, given that by basic arguments of probability, intelligent life should be widespread in the galaxy. The Drake equation, formulated in 1961, estimates the number of communicative civilizations in the Milky Way based on a series of parameters. Different reasonable values for the parameters produce different estimates, from a few civilizations to many millions. The actual observed number of civilizations is currently 0. The absence of detected signals, despite decades of searching, is the Fermi paradox. Proposed resolutions include: civilizations are rare. Civilizations exist but do not communicate. Civilizations exist but communicate in ways we cannot detect. We have not been searching long enough. The universe is, at present, too young for most civilizations to have arisen. No proposed resolution is generally accepted. The silence continues. The cosmic microwave background anomalies. The cosmic microwave background, the residual radiation from the early universe, is one of the most uniform observed phenomena in physics. Its variations are at the level of approximately 1 part in 100,000. Several persistent anomalies in the CMB have, however, been observed and not explained. The axis of evil, a apparent preferred direction in the CMB, contrary to expectations of isotropy. The cold spot in the constellation Eridanus, a region of the CMB that is unusually low in temperature. These anomalies are statistical. They are at the boundary of what can be confidently distinguished from chance. They may reflect noise in the data, residual instrumental effects, or genuine large-scale features of the universe that are not predicted by current cosmology. The investigation continues. The Hubble tension. The rate at which the universe is currently expanding is called the Hubble constant. Two principal methods are used to measure it. The first uses observations of supernovae and other standard candle objects in the relatively nearby universe. The second uses measurements of the cosmic microwave background, which encode information about the early universe. The two methods produce different values for the Hubble constant. The two values differ by approximately 5%. If both measurements were correct, the discrepancy would imply that our understanding of cosmology is incomplete. Either there is new physics between the early universe and the present, or one of the measurements is systematically wrong. The discrepancy has grown over the past decade as both measurements have become more precise. The Hubble tension is the most discussed unresolved problem in current cosmology. It may resolve into mundane systematic errors. It may indicate that the universe is more interesting than current theory suggests. At Tier 6, the universe presents puzzles that are not artifacts of human cognition. They are features of the universe itself. We do not understand most of what exists. Tier 7, the bottom of the iceberg. At the bottom of the space exploration, icebergs sit ideas and reports that are either speculative, deeply contested, or at the edges of what physics can frame. These are the limits of what the public discussion can reach. They are not necessarily the limits of what the field knows. The unidentified anomalous phenomena. In 2021, the United States Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a report on unidentified aerial phenomena, the modern bureaucratic term for what was previously called unidentified flying objects. The report documented 144 incidents observed by United States military personnel between 2004 and 2021. 18 of the incidents involved phenomena that appeared to violate known principles of aerodynamic flight. The report could not identify the source of the phenomena. In 2022, the United States Congress established the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office to investigate further. The office has produced subsequent unclassified reports. The classified portion of the investigation remains classified. Whether the phenomena reflect foreign technology, atmospheric or sensor artifacts, or something else has not been publicly resolved. The investigation continues. The phenomena, when first reported, were dismissed as folkloric. They are now the subject of active United States government research. The simulation hypothesis. We discussed this in the video games Iceberg. In 2003, philosopher Nick Bostrom published a paper arguing that given sufficient computational resources, a sufficiently advanced civilization would likely run ancestor simulations of its history from the simulation's interior. The simulated would be unable to distinguish their world from a base reality. The hypothesis is not testable by current science. It is a serious philosophical proposition. It implies that the universe we observe might be a computational artifact rather than a physical substrate. The hypothesis has been taken seriously by some physicists, including Neil deGrasse Tyson, who has stated a probability greater than 50% that we live in a simulation. At the bottom of the space exploration iceberg, the question of what we are observing through our telescopes becomes, in some formulations, a question about the nature of observation itself. The von Neumann probes. In the 1940 seconds, mathematician John von Neumann described the concept of self-replicating machines. Applied to space exploration, a sufficiently advanced civilization could send out probes that upon reaching another star system would mine local resources, build copies of themselves, and send those copies onward. Such a probe network could span an entire galaxy in geologically short timescales. The absence of von Neumann probes in our solar system is one of the leading expressions of the Fermi paradox. If such probes exist anywhere, they should be everywhere, including here by now. They are not. The Earth, by current observation, does not host detectable von Neumann probes. The probes might be hidden, they might be subtle, they might not exist. The absence is a data point in the broader question of the universe's silence, the dark forest hypothesis, proposed by the science fiction writer Lou Sixon in his novel, The Dark Forest. The hypothesis suggests that intelligent civilizations remain silent because announcing themselves to the galaxy is on average dangerous. Any civilization that broadcasts its existence may be targeted by other civilizations that view it as a potential threat. The universe is therefore a dark forest, full of hidden hunters who do not reveal themselves. The hypothesis is not testable in the conventional scientific sense. It is consistent with the observed silence. It is also consistent with other hypotheses. As a model for civilizational behavior, it makes sociological assumptions that may or may not be valid across other species. The dark forest is a literary frame that has been taken seriously enough to influence policy discussions about active SETI, the deliberate transmission of signals announcing humanity's location. The current scientific consensus in active SETI circles is split. Some institutions transmit. Some refrain. The future on this question is not settled. The Boltzmann brain problem. In the very long-term future of the universe, if current cosmological models are correct, ordinary matter will become extremely rare. Random thermal fluctuations in the remaining vacuum, however, can occasionally produce, by sheer statistical chance, structures of increasing complexity, given enough time, a single conscious observer. A Boltzmann brain can spontaneously assemble from random fluctuations. In an infinite time future, the number of randomly assembled conscious observers may exceed the number of ordinary observers like ourselves. If so, by simple counting, any given observer is more likely to be a Boltzmann brain than an evolved being on a real planet. The Boltzmann brain problem is not a serious cosmological proposition. It is a paradox that emerges from current models when extrapolated to infinity. The paradox suggests that current models are, in some respect, incomplete. The deepest models of the universe contain paradoxes that no one has solved. The unsolved paradoxes do not appear in the textbooks aimed at general audiences. At the surface, you have the public record of human spaceflight, the satellites, the astronauts, the missions to the moon, and the planets. Beneath the surface, the acknowledged disasters where the public record contains the failures alongside the achievements. Beneath that, the forgotten losses that fell out of public memory or were never granted entry. Beneath that, the classified programs that run alongside the public ones. Beneath that, the unexplained phenomena that have been observed but not accounted for. Beneath that, the astronomical mysteries that current physics cannot resolve. And at the bottom, the speculative frames within which space exploration takes on a different meaning entirely. 68 years ago, the first artificial object reached orbit. In the time since, we have placed 11,000 objects above the atmosphere. We have walked on the moon, we have lost ships, we have classified programs, we have observed phenomena we cannot explain. We have asked questions about the universe that we have not yet answered. The exploration has not ended. The iceberg, in every direction we look, continues downward.